Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
I've got no intention of eking out every single second, so I would plan to take my own life. As the law stands, and because I wouldn't want to get anyone into trouble, I would have to do that alone.
I want to live until God wants me to die, and then he'll sort that out, not me. I have no idea how it's going to happen. I don't want to know. I see no reason why palliative care should not be available for me.
Two opposing views there on the issue of assisted dying for members of the public. Tomorrow, MPs will spend 5 hours debating a bill on the issue. It's the first such debate in the House of Commons in almost a decade. Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Yuan. Welcome to the programme. Now, the first attempt at the reform of the law around assisted suicide took place in the House of Lords back in 1936. Since then, there have been numerous attempts to introduce legislation, most recently votes in 1997 and in 2015. Both those times, MPs overwhelmingly rejected the case for change. But this time around, campaigners believe there's a very real chance of the bill succeeding.
The proposal that MPs will be debating would ultimately allow terminally ill adults who are expected to die within 6 months to seek help to end their own life. There are conditions attached. The person must be over the age of 18, live in England or Wales, be registered with a GP, and have the mental capacity to make a choice about ending their life. They'd have to express what's being described as a clear, settled and informed wish, and be making this decision free from coercion or from pressure. There'll be 2 independent doctors required to determine whether the person satisfies the criteria to take their own life as well, and a High Court judge would then verify whether they are eligible and that they've made their decision voluntarily. So it's a bill that has plenty of safeguards built in. It's a complex and an emotive subject for politicians. Plenty of differing opinions exist within the House of Commons, and interestingly, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has come out against the bill.
Yeah, the intervention of the Health Secretary, controversial as ministers were guided not to express an opinion. Wes Streeting saying that the costs needed to be considered and that he would be voting against the bill. But controversy and parliamentary procedure aside, this is a debate which inspires deep emotion on both sides. The MP behind the bill, Kim Leadbeater, says that the focus should be on families affected by the harrowing deaths of their loved ones. But others have expressed concern that the changes could alter the way society views the elderly, the seriously ill and the disabled. Even if MPs do vote in favour of the bill tomorrow, the debate on the detail will go on for many months.
Yeah, it's a debate that's going to be followed very closely as well. And to discuss further some of the issues involved, we're joined by the Conservative MP Kit Malthouse, who is co-sponsoring the bill in the House of Commons. Kit, thank you for joining us on the programme. Could you start by telling us how you came to your position in supporting this change in the law?
Well, there are 2 reasons. I mean, since I've been basically a teenager, I've always believed in choice, liberty and personal autonomy. And I can't think of a more profound moment that I would need those 3 things than when I'm facing an agonising death. But then over the last 10 years or so of campaigning here in the House of Commons, I've spent so much time with dying and bereaved people and heard so many of their, frankly, horrific stories where we've wept together. Those stories will never leave me. And it became clear to me that the status quo we have at the moment is just completely unacceptable, where we've got 600 and odd people a year taking their own lives in brutal, violent ways. 1 person a week on average going to Switzerland to end their lives with a sort of business class version. And that's before you talk about the people in hospital who are refusing treatment and starving themselves to death. Now, I think in those circumstances where we know that even the best palliative care can't deal with everybody's symptoms, we need to give people the choice. And to do that, we have to bring order, regulation and supervision to what is currently a kind of horrible free-for-all.
Proponents have said that the bill is very tightly drawn, but numerous examples around the world have seen narrow criteria widen. Belgium perhaps being the most egregious example, where assisted dying has been legal for 20 years now. And there, children with parental consent and people with mental health conditions and others are allowed to take their own lives. Do you see the risks of this being changed over time?
No, and your basic premise, I'm afraid, is not correct. The Health and Social Care Committee of the House of Commons did a 14-month inquiry into assisted dying, which published in February this year, and they found that in territories that had adopted the same formula that we have, adults terminally ill within 6 months, there had been no expansion of eligibility at all, and that includes Oregon, who've had it for 27 years. in places like Canada and Belgium, they started from a different place from us, and they have a different cultural sensibility about these issues. But that's true of all sorts of issues. So, for example, in Canada, it's still legally possible to have an abortion up until the point of birth. Because the Canadians do it that way, doesn't mean to say we shouldn't have our own laws around abortion. So we think, my view is we're a 1,000-year-old democracy. If the principle is established, which I believe it is, then we should be able to design legislation that suits our own cultural sensibilities, and that's what we've tried to do.
On the mechanics of what's being proposed in this bill, though, the involvement of judicial oversight, do the courts have the capacity to be able to deal with that? And are you concerned that perhaps it might actually end up rendering access to assisted dying more difficult because of the practicalities involved?
Well, no. I mean, this case has been made repeatedly, and yet the courts are constantly dealing with new matters that Parliament puts before them. That's the same argument. You should say, well, we shouldn't have this new law on spiking that's been announced because it'll put pressure on the courts. That's not how things work. And in conversations that Kim Leadbeater, who's the proposer of the bill, has had with the judiciary, they've assured her that they will adapt. The courts deal with these things all the time. But that's before you get into the argument to say, well, okay, so what's the counterfactual? Because you think it's a bit of hassle for the courts, I should die in horrible agony? Surely it's the other way around. The courts exist for the people, as the NHS exists for the patient, not the other way around.
I'm interested that you've made a conservative case about freedom of choice, but last time in 2015, only 1 in 9 Conservative MPs supported it. It was basically voted down by Conservatives. Do you think it will be different this time? What's the feeling among your colleagues?
Yes, I do. A number of people have changed their minds, certainly in my party and indeed across the House and the country. And we've had a very powerful intervention just this morning from David Cameron, former Prime Minister, who, having thought about it over the decade, has changed his mind and is now supporting the bill. And so I think we are in a very different place. I do find with colleagues there is a bit of a conflict, though, in that they will be, say they are effectively pro-choice, pro-autonomy, pro-responsibility, but then this most profound of choices that so many people desire, where there's overwhelming public support and very obvious human suffering, they hesitate. What I hope is that in the debate tomorrow, we'll be able to convince more of them to come across. There are many in the party who have a profound religious faith, and I respect that. And it doesn't matter what legislation we design, they would never vote for it. But I hope that those who see this conflict between their fundamental values and this issue, notwithstanding it's a very difficult one, will come to the right decision.
I wonder, are you happy with the idea of there being this free vote on the bill? Does it open space for perhaps mature political debate that we haven't had so much of in recent years?
Traditionally, these things are always a free vote, and so they should be. These aren't matters of politics. These are matters of personal conscience and belief. And so in the same way that we've had it for abortion, decriminalisation of homosexuality, abolition of the death penalty, these things are well done by the House of Commons this way. And it's worth remembering, of course, that the debate takes place in places other than in the chamber. So over the last few weeks, there have been lots of meetings held in the House with panels of experts from overseas, from the disability community, from religious representatives. We had just this week a panel of senior palliative care professionals who are supporting the bill. And so MPs have had lots and lots of opportunity to have that kind of mature debate, and I'm sure we'll see that reflected tomorrow.
What do you think about the intervention of Wes Streeting? So clearly somebody who feels strongly about this and running the NHS, he has an interest in this. Did you think that was legitimate? Well, no, I mean, he very obviously broke the guidance. But, I understand that people feel strongly. I have to say, I don't really understand the argument he was making. I mean, the people we're talking about are already within 6 months of death. So they're already within the NHS and being treated. It's not a new group of people showing up asking new services. And as I said earlier, my assumption has always been that the NHS exists for patients. And what patients require is what comes first. And if the principle is established, then the NHS has to
adapt to that. This argument was made way back when heart transplants were first brought into being. People said, oh, we can't do them because there'll be too much stress on the NHS and there'll be surgeons will be diverted from other things. And nobody looks back now and thinks, well, we shouldn't have done heart transplants. And we think that, if people are facing a horrible ending, we want to give them the choice to go at a time and in a manner of their own choosing, and that the NHS would, in a very humane way, accommodate that, as it had lots of other new procedures.
Yeah, of course, West Streeting had just said that he would vote against the bill because he suggested that what it proposed could lead to cuts in other NHS services. I do wonder about the parliamentary mechanics of this as well, though. Are you concerned that there could be, call it filibustering or amendments being used to delay this bill?
Well, we've had some amendments or an amendment, I think, put down. I mean, I hope not. I think both sides recognise that the British public want to see a sensible, mature debate in the House of Commons and then a vote on the substantive issue. We are talking about real human suffering here. There is overwhelming public support for the House to at least consider and, in fact, to support this. And anybody who tries to stand in the way of that through procedural matters will, frankly, bring the House into disrepute. And last time in 2015, the debate was very respectful and very orderly, and I'm sure that the House will cooperate with the Speaker in making sure that's the case this time.
A number of religious leaders have taken part in this discussion. You mentioned them earlier in your answer. How do you feel about faith taking part in this? Do you think that's appropriate?
Oh, it's completely legitimate. Of course it is. I mean, faith is part of someone's makeup and their belief system, and it should inform their politics. So I'm completely fine about that. And I hope, and a number of people have been upfront. I mean, to be fair, Shabana Mahmood said in her letter that was leaked that, her starting point was her faith. And I think that's completely fine. My contention would be, well, I understand your faith and I respect your ability, and I always would protect your right to practice your faith. But I just would not like you to impose your choices on me. Okay. If this bill goes through its procedure and we get assisted dying in this country, it won't be compulsory. If you don't want to choose it, please don't. But all I'm asking is that you don't stop me.
Okay. Kit Malthouse, Conservative MP, co-sponsor of the bill on assisted dying. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme. That is it from us for today. Please do subscribe to the programme to get all of our episodes directly into your podcast feed.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Bostamakia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.